Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11, the highest possible level. This week's guest is Brianne Reed, and an incredible story starting with Rutgers University, where she honestly wasn't sure if she'd be able to play at the Division I level. And one thing led to another. Played in a match where, as the saying goes, you never know who's watching. And fast forward to she's on campus as a freshman and playing quite a bit as a right back for the team. 4 years, super successful career from an individual accolade standpoint at Rutgers, goes on to be drafted. And as we know, sometimes with the highest level of sports or the highest level of soccer in the United States, whether that's the NWSL, the MLS, being drafted doesn't always necessarily mean that it's a guarantee at a successful career in the MLS or the NWSL. It doesn't guarantee minutes. It doesn't even guarantee a contract up front, to be perfectly honest, in most situations. And that is what Brianne was faced with, having to fight her way onto the team in preseason and then fight her way for kind of limited minutes. So taking her career over to Europe. Past 6 years, she plied her trade in Scandinavia and just finished up a season down under in Australia as well. It's an amazing story. I appreciate her so much for coming on and telling it. I thank all of you out there who continue to listen, continue to show your support for these episodes. Make sure you do that for this episode right here. So whether you are watching, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or whether you are listening, make sure that you do just the same. Follow along, subscribe, and without further ado, I'll kick it over to myself. Stepping into the 11 now, and joining us is Brianne Reed, coming off a pretty successful season from the sounds of it, winning some silverware down under, and now just coming off of a national team camp as well. So things are pretty busy. First and foremost, I want to thank you for taking time, out of your schedule to come and share your story. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, are we still kind of on cloud nine after the Australian season? Like, talk to me a little bit about just what that was like, and obviously met with a lot of success.
Yeah, I kind of went into Australia not really knowing what to expect. And I won a cup championship in Denmark, but I'd never won a league. So that was a first in my career and very exciting one. So yes, still on cloud nine, still showing my little gold medal to anybody who wants to ask about it.
Yeah. I was curious about this because I saw that you had won the cup in Denmark as well. And then obviously winning the league, there's certainly a little more that goes into that. Like, does it ever feel, knowing everything that it took to get to that point, right? Not just necessarily for the team, but also for you kind of individually in a season and in a career, like, does it ever have that much just more weight to it to kind of lift a trophy at the end of a season like that when you're like, this is the third country that I've lived in and played, you know what I mean? Like, just there's so much backstory that goes into actually just taking that picture with that medal.
Absolutely. I remember we had those like team meetings that you have when you get close to the championship and everybody's like, what's your why? Why are you doing this? And I remember saying to my group, I was like, I don't know how many more years I'll play, but I know that I've been playing the past 7 years and I haven't won a league. Even in college, like I had a lot of success with Rutgers, but we never won a Big Ten championship. I made it to a semifinal, but we didn't win the national championship. So I've always been close. So like all of those little moments felt like they finally added up to finally winning a championship.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I love that you bring up the question of what's your why too. Do you feel like that's been something throughout your career that you've sort of created as maybe your North Star or your guiding kind of light throughout the career of like, what is your why when it comes to playing this game?
Yeah, I feel like as a player, it's something you have to constantly ask yourself, because there's also been so many moments that truly I'm like, why am I doing this? And the question comes up more than I thought it would have ever, because, you get to the professional level and you're like, this is everything I've dreamed of. This is what I wanted. But then you hit your roadblocks and you're like, why am I doing this? So yeah,
Yeah.
to have that why and to know why, and it changes, like my why for why I wanted to win the championship versus why I wanted to win a Danish Cup versus why I wanted to go to Australia. All of those whys are different and they change. But yeah, you have to know why you're doing those things, or else it's very easy to get lost.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you said, more often than not, you're literally going to ask yourself that question of
Mhm.
why am I doing this? Really? And you have to have a solid answer, because at
Yeah,
certain
but
points.
also for all the other people who are like, "Why are you doing this?"
Exactly. Yeah, because other people aren't quite going to understand it. So you better make sure that you have a pretty good why for yourself, or else you're not going to be able to how to answer that question. Um, so much that I want to dive into, even just what we talked about in these first couple minutes here. But if we use kind of that framework of what is your why, was it love at first sight with this game, and knowing that you wanted to do special things with the game, or was it just kind of a sport that maybe kind of fell into love with as it progressed?
1,000%, I fell into love with it. Soccer was my second sport. Gymnastics was my first, and
Okay.
that had my heart for 10 years. And I thought I was going to be like, I wish I was Simone Biles still to this day. I love soccer, but I wish I was Simone Biles.
Yeah.
Um, so soccer definitely was a slow burn, even up until I got to college and I was like, oh, okay, I can play at the D1 level. And then when I got to the end of my college career and I was like, oh, okay, I want to keep playing professionally. This is not what I would have pictured. My dad says it all the time. He's like, never in my life would I thought I'd have a daughter who plays soccer professionally, because it doesn't run in our family either. So I have watched over the years, even just the game itself. Like, I didn't grow up watching. I didn't have like those icons that I looked to.
Yeah.
But now I watch so much of the game and I see so many different facets of it, of the tactical, the technical, the team aspects, the culture. And I love all of that so much now, but it was a long time coming.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to just 'cause doing some of the research for coming and speaking to you today. I saw that you were on another podcast. I believe it was called the um, Kick It podcast or something. It was when you were down in Australia.
Yep.
Um, and you had mentioned kind of that idea of like almost not really being sure if you would be able to play at the Division 1 level. And then
Mhm.
obviously,
Yeah.
as we go back and look at your career, pretty successful from an individual kind of standpoint. And two, to just look at the body of work of your career now, what you've done, probably someone now would look at the career and be like, really? She thought she wasn't going to be able to play Division 1. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah,
so
I totally understand that.
but I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, like that idea of kind of being in high school and not really knowing if Division 1 college soccer was something that was going to be in the cards for you.
Yeah. So I played for my local club growing up. I didn't have to do the whole 2 hours to training, travel. Like, no, it was 10 minutes. And even the other club that I bounced to was 15 minutes away. And they were competitive enough to keep me at a decent level. But I also don't think I knew the scope of the fact that there were levels significantly higher than what I was playing at. So I was happy
Yeah.
with the little bubble that I was playing in. And it got to that junior year. And I remember the year before, I had a coach who was talking about college recruiting. And the group of us, he was like, yeah, you guys will make good D3 players. So, like, he knew more
Yeah.
than I did. Nobody in my family, my dad played basketball in college, but like nobody had gone through the soccer process. So I was like, okay, he must be right. Um, and then I started going to these showcases, and he was right. I was getting interest from like some D3 schools. Um, but then I actually got recruited to Rutgers through high school. I played in a state, I think it was a state final, against a girl who was committed to Rutgers. So the coach was there watching that game, and I spent all game marking her, making sure she didn't have anything to do with the ball. And that's actually how I ended up getting recruited. So it was a surprise because Rutgers, I'm from New Jersey, but it was never on my radar of like, I want to go there. But
Yeah.
when it presented itself, I was like, okay, I might not be at that level yet, but I'm willing to go to the school because that was at the time they were in the Big East. I was like, that's the most competitive level that I've been offered. And it's a good educational school. It's in state. And I feel like I shouldn't ignore this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, it's awesome that you bring up this story because it reinforces the kind of cliche that thousands of coaches have told us for, our whole careers, like, you never know who's watching, right? Anytime you're playing,
Yeah.
you never know who's watching. And it's like, you hear that and you're like, playing in some game where there's 10 parents in the stands and it's freezing. You're like, there's nobody here. But all that, like, you really do never know. And so it's a great story. And so then going to Rutgers, what was it? Was it, a shock kind of day one freshman year of arriving? Like, did you know what to expect, or just going in completely blind? Like, maybe talk to me about that beginning process of arriving on campus.
Yeah. So like I said, I played for my local clubs, but Mike O'Neill, who's the coach at Rutgers now, my team folded and he was like, this was my senior year. He said, you should come up to PDA and I can start to make you familiar with the game, more tactical knowledge, things like that. So I did my senior year with PDA, which couldn't have worked out more perfectly because I did get that kind of intro into, I feel like, the style that Rutgers was going to play. So it wasn't like this huge, like, abrupt change.
Yeah.
So I felt like that made the transition easy in terms of what to expect. The level was still higher than I thought. I am not a naturally fitness test person. So all of that, Kate, was like a slap in the face, because all my teams before that, like, I don't know, we'd do some running, but we weren't running beep tests or anything like that. So when it came to the fitness level, that was definitely a big shock for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a test or maybe a day that really stands out to you? Because I brought this up before, but I remember a couple weeks ago I had Rashida Beal on the podcast, who played for the University of Minnesota, and she like spoke about how when she got there, she was like, "Oh my God, we are doing so much fitness, so much like work in the gym, like." And I think it's maybe something that would be interesting for players outside of really the United States kind of college soccer world to hear about.
Yeah. It was definitely my fitness test day. My college roommate was that fitness person. So she was the one that, like, I was trying to keep up with.
Yeah.
And I remember we ran the Man U on day one. And then after that, we went into like defensive drills where you're just like shuffling the whole time. Your legs are already dead. I think the next day we ran the mile, and it was just like day one. It wasn't like we got our welcome binder and then they were like, okay, grab your sneakers and then grab your boots. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
But I remember we were doing the Man U test, and I can't remember what level I had to get, but I think maybe 20. And I don't think I passed, but I remember watching her keep going, and she was just like as white as a ghost. And I was like, what did I just sign myself up for? This is only year one. How is this supposed to get better from here?
Yeah. And it's funny too, because it's just like how the game evolves, and like to the science around the game evolves, and it seems like now you would talk to like any physiotherapist or any someone who works in kind of athletic training, like they'd be like, yeah, that's not really healthy for any athletes to do. Like, you're just breaking down your body day after day, and there's no time for recovery whatsoever.
Right.
But clearly, like, you adjusted to like that level and were able to play quite a bit. How do you look back at your career of Rutgers as a whole? I know that you said you wish you could have kind of left it with a championship, as well as I'm sure a lot of us who played college soccer wish that as well.
There's one happy team at the end of the year.
I know, I know. But I'm sure, I think anytime I speak to players who especially get to play to school for all 4 years, like it's a pretty special time that they look back on.
Yeah. My freshman year, I came in, and I'm naturally a center back. And I remember the coach at the time wanted to play me as outside back because the center back spots were kind of locked up. And I was like, okay, I'll take whatever minutes I can. This isn't my natural position, but if you're going to give me time, I'll take it. But I remember one game, it was early too. We played UVA, and he looked at me and he said, can you play midfield? And as a freshman, I feel like so many people would have been like, yes, I'll do it, whatever, put me on the field. And I looked at him and I said, no. If you want any chance of having success in this game, I cannot do that for you. I knew my limit. I was like, I'm going to look like a chicken with my head cut off if you put me in the midfield.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that didn't like have an effect on my career and say that like I didn't get a chance after that. But I just remember that game. I was like, the wise decision is to tell him that I can't do this. Yeah. So I did some outside back. And it was fine. It was good for my fitness. And even going into my sophomore year, I really wasn't sure if I was going to get a chance to play center back because one still had another year. I think both still had another year. But then preseason started and one of the girls quit. She's like, I'm done. I'm burnt out. I don't want to play anymore.
Wow.
And that was kind of my chance to step in. Whether or not they were ready to give me that chance, I was the next option.
Yeah.
So that window opening up was my chance. And I was willing to take in all the information. It was all very new to me because, like I said, I didn't get much tactics. But from there, I solidified my spot and I played that left center back spot for the rest of those 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would that be probably a piece of advice? I guess maybe you've kind of experienced kind of both sides of the coin, right? Because there was one opportunity that was kind of presented to you and you were like, that's not really going to suit me to the best of my abilities, which there's probably some, smart thinking in that. And like, if you don't really go and perform well and have a good impression, like that might be the last impression that a coach has on
Right.
you. And they might not give you a chance for a little while. So I definitely understand that. But at the same time, like, okay, center back spot is now open. You're the next one up. Like, would that be a piece of advice that you would give to younger players, maybe coming up through college or even the professional ranks? Like, you just have to always be ready when the opportunity is called, and you never know when it's gonna ring.
Absolutely. Even when I was just in Australia, I had a lot of young girls on my team, and I had a young center back who started off the season playing with me and then ended up not playing so much. And just trying to help them understand that, like, you really do just like keep working. The coach is watching. Just because I'm in this spot doesn't mean at any point the spot's not going to open up. God forbid I get an injury, the other center back gets an injury. You
Yeah.
can't be sitting around moping because you're not playing, because you could get that call up at any moment. So I know it's so much easier said than done. But I do try to encourage the younger players that I'm with on a team, just keep going, just keep working. They're watching. I want you to be ready when you have your opportunity. Like you said, you don't want to be in that position. You get the opportunity and then you're not ready. And then
Yeah.
you've lost your chance. It changes the way the coach sees you. So yeah, I really do try to encourage players to just keep working at it.
Yeah. I'm curious too, like that transition of, because I know it's something that I find so kind of bizarre about the world of soccer is like the way in which age it completely warps your idea of age. Like, and me, like going from like I almost still consider myself to be a young player, like just trying to figure things out and develop and grow. But then I'm like, oh wait, I'm not. I've been doing this a while, Like now I have like 18-year-olds coming up to me and saying things. I'm like, oh, okay, we're in a very different place. Like,
Yeah.
do you remember at all kind of maybe having that transition of like, oh, now I'm maybe quote unquote one of the veteran players that are trying to help younger players that are coming up?
I do. It was when I got to Denmark. Um, I was 24 or 25, but our team was just so young that
Uh,
that was considered old. And I remember just being shocked. Like, I had advice that I wanted to share, but in no means did I think my experience in terms of my resume put me in the category of a veteran player. But it's all relative. When I am the player who's played at that point 2.5 years professionally, and
yeah,
everybody else was playing at a semi-professional level or in a lower league, then yeah, I become the veteran, whether or not I'm 29 or 25. So
yeah.
I remember it clearly because you're right. I had like 16-year-olds that were like, what do I do with this? And I'm like, I was just 16, it felt like.
I know.
Why are you asking me?
I know. It, yeah, it's just such an insane world, I guess, in the way that age kind of works in this specific sport. It can completely, well, and sport in general, completely kind of different than any other, walk of life. Like any other career, you're kind of just, you are still necessarily young. But I want to set the scene kind of coming into some of these other teams and finding your way to Denmark. When you leave college, um, drafted by Kansas City, like what was that experience like to go and be drafted into the NWSL, like the top of the top in the United States?
It was a roller coaster because the season ended with our loss to Penn State in the semifinal.
Okay.
And I remember crying on the field because the season was over. I was done with the girls, but also because I was like, is my soccer career now over?
Yeah.
But it was in that game, or a few games before that season, that I was like, I think I do want to keep playing. I feel like I'm just starting to grasp things. My body's healthy. I feel good. I still love the game. I feel like I should keep playing. So I threw my name into the draft because people are like, whether or not, like, you never know what coaches want, go ahead. And I think because of the success that Rutgers had that year, my name was kind of in the mix of possibly getting drafted, but I didn't really know what to expect of it. And then I remember getting a text from Kansas City. I think I was on vacation in the Dominican Republic, honestly. And they're like, we're considering drafting you. Would you be interested? And I was like, yes, but is this like, do I have to sign now? How does this work? Do I still go to the draft? Are you going to call the draft? Like, I just had so many questions. But I think it was just more of an expression of interest, because I also knew that Kansas City could draft me, but then I could get traded during the draft and not end up going to Kansas City.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get my hopes up too much. I kind of pretended. I was like, okay, I got the call. They're interested. Just leave it as that. But my coach kind of gave me a nudge. He's like, you should go to the draft. I think it'll be a cool experience. But I was also nervous to go to the draft and be the person who's sitting there to not get drafted.
Yeah.
But I think he knew more than I did, because he was like, you should go. I was like, okay,
Wink,
got
wink,
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an awesome experience. I sat there with my parents, not really knowing. I remember I had heels on and my feet hurt. I took my shoes off, thinking that like my name wasn't going to be called for a bit. And then I had to scramble, and the camera's on you, like watching you follow you up the stage as I'm trying to scramble to put my shoes on.
Yeah.
So it was a whirlwind, but it was cool. And I know they've done even more now with the draft, where it feels so professional in the environment and the atmosphere they create around it now, that I'm sure players get it even better than we did when I was drafted.
Yeah. And I'm so like, I always am so curious about the draft process, because obviously it's something that's so unique to America versus anywhere else in the world. And, I've spoken to players that have, experienced the draft in different degrees, from the women's and the men's side of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering if you can just kind of help me illustrate this picture of, like, there's over 300 Division I women's college soccer teams, right? Mm-hmm. And there's 12 teams in the NWSL. And so, even if you look at every team in college soccer has only a handful of seniors and, maybe one or two each, like the bare minimum, you're probably looking at a couple hundred players that are kind of all vying for these spots. And like NWSL teams already have rosters, and there's foreign players too that come into the mix. Like, I don't know, is there any way to kind of illustrate to someone who's unfamiliar, like how just competitive this process is for these few draft spots? And not to mention, I know a lot of those draft spots aren't necessarily like, hey, we're drafting you and here's a contract. Sometimes it's, hey, we're drafting you, and then still you got to come prove yourself in preseason.
That's what my situation was, but I didn't know that.
It's
like, oh, I got drafted. Cool. This is it. And then you get there and they're like, oh, by the way, like, this is just a glorified tryout. You just got invited to try out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the competitiveness, I think for the Players Network, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we did all the numbers between like NCAA Division 1, 2, and 3, NAIA, JUCO, the amount of players, the amount of programs, the amount of people who want to play professionally, and to only have 48 spots. And like you said, getting drafted doesn't necessarily mean that you got the contract. And if you do get the contract, it still doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play.
Yep.
And there's so many talented players. Like I truly feel blessed. Like, I know I worked hard to get there, but the fact that a coach saw something in me and decided to choose me out of the hundreds, thousands players, it really is a special moment when you can step back and look like, wow, okay, for me, it was like, wow, you do deserve to be at this level, because like I said, my path didn't show that this was where I was going to be. And to get drafted, I was like, okay, you're pretty good now. Like you can say that you're a good player.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I'm also just too so fascinated by this this sort of idea of a player's career being that roller coaster, right? And I feel like the draft is probably a very realistic depiction of that, in the sense, like you said, where you have this high of being drafted and kind of having that moment for yourself and for your family, and then it's sort of like it transitions into, you go right into preseason, and now, like, for lack of a better word, you're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole, and it's like
Absolutely.
sink or swim, like what are you going to do to really make this team? And so those highs and those lows, I mean, coming into that Kansas City preseason, I know even I heard you talk about, like, you're competing for spots with Becky Sauerbrunn, who's like, national team, U.S. national team legend. Like,
Yeah.
what, what is, can you even put into some of the emotions, what you're feeling in that preseason?
It was overwhelming because I was naive enough to think that the level that I was playing at, I was like, oh, it can't get much higher than this. Like, college soccer, it's the best. And then I got there, and you're surrounded by people who already have years of professional experience, national team experience. And I just remember feeling like, what's that phrase? The little fish in the big pond. Like, it felt
Yeah.
like I was a freshman all over again. And I was like, okay, this first year, I just need to get my bearings. I need to understand what this coach likes, what he wants. If you get minutes, great. But I really felt like I just used my first year at Kansas City to just learn.
Mm.
And I felt like Becky, and at the time, Yael was there. I got to, when we broke up into our functional sessions and I was training with them defensively, like, I just got to watch and see the way that they do things and see what parts of their game that I like that I can maybe add to my game. So it definitely wasn't like the fairy tale first year
Yeah.
experience, but I do think it was so foundational in the rest of my career.
Mm. That idea of going in and kind of being a sponge, right, and learning. How do you, maybe what advice would you give to a younger player who's trying to get to that point? And I guess I'm asking in the sense of, like, a lot of players can almost kind of get swallowed up by that overwhelming feeling, right? Whether you're coming into a preseason or you're coming into a trial. And it's funny because it's like, we're all of us, if we get to that level, we're good enough players to kind of add something to the group and add something to the level.
Right.
But sometimes you can become so crippled by that, just those nerves and the overwhelming, and all of a sudden, like, it feels like your feet stop working, right? Like,
Yes.
and so how does a player that's going into, a situation where they might feel like the little fish in a big pond, how can they maybe just, put one foot in front of the other to be able to actually kind of hang with the level for a little while?
I had to go back to what I knew I was good at. I remember looking at the pool of players that I was training with, and they were just so good technically with their feet, and I just wasn't there yet. And I know the one thing that I'm good at is 1v1 defending. And so I made sure that when I was at training, that was the thing that I was going to be good at, because that's all I could focus on. Everything else was just, at that time, so much for me that I was like, you are a defender. You know how to defend. So defend. Start there. And that's probably the reason Vlatko drafted you, was because of this ability. So remind him of that. Show him the thing that you're good at. And then once you feel comfortable with that, once you gain a bit of your confidence back, then you can start adding some more of the little pieces back in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Kind of hone in on one thing where you can really excel at, and then, all right, then let's start to kind of add other tools to the tool belt as we feel a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
So then the season, I know you stayed, I think you said you stayed a year and a half at Kansas City. Is the thought there kind of when you're early on in your career, like, maybe even similar to the way a lot of people approach college, and I'll gain some experience, I'll learn, and then I'll start to build my career from here, like in the NWSL or with Kansas City?
Yep. So I thought I was going to be in the NWSL for years. I did my first year at Kansas City, like I said, learning year, and I went back for the second year, and I was like, okay, I've put in this work in the off season. I really want to see if I can break into the lineup somehow, on a more consistent basis. And I got there, and it was just still a lot of the same. And I was still competing with the same people, regardless of the fact that I worked harder. They just had more experience than me. And I remember sitting down with the coach, and I was like, I need the experience, but you won't play me. So I don't know
Yeah.
how to get better at this point. And I had a teammate that was with me in Kansas City who had played abroad previously. And she was like, my old team in Sweden, their center back just tore their ACL. This is the way that you can get your experience. Going over there doesn't mean that you can't come back, but this will give you the confidence of getting 90 minutes in your feet again, being on the ball, getting to play games. You'll get that confidence back. And then you can come back maybe next year with that confidence, with that experience to be able to show a coach and say, hey, I have experience now. What do you want to do with this?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's tough. It's almost like the kind of just regular job market, so to speak, right? Where it's like it's entry level job, but we're asking for 1 to 3 years of experience, right? It's like, okay,
Yes.
well, how do I? These two things aren't working. If I can't actually get the experience, I'll never get the experience, right?
Exactly.
So, what's the feeling like of going to Sweden? Is there any kind of maybe disappointment with it not working out with NWSL? Is there just excitement for a new opportunity and like you said, to go and actually get that experience and actually play?
It was definitely disappointment and just nervousness. I had never been to Europe. I obviously didn't know Swedish. It was in this small town in Sweden too, where I was like, okay, are people even going to speak English that well? But I had to take that moment to like also be sad for the fact that I was like, I came here, I wanted to be that NWSL player, but I'm not ready.
Yeah.
So I took that moment to be sad about that, but I was like, but this is my opportunity to, if I do want to be that player, I think this is the next step that I have to take. So it took a little bit of time for my mindset to shift to the more positive side. But once I got there and once I started playing again, I was like, I already knew it was the right move. I was like, I could have spent another 4 months just training and hoping to get better, but not getting that game time versus going here, putting myself in a bit of an uncomfortable situation for 3 months.
Yeah.
To be able to start to feel it again and just enjoy the game again too.
Yeah. I'm not even going to try and disrespect the Swedish people by saying it. So I'm just going to go with the abbreviation that you had mentioned of KIK.
Yeah, that's
And I wonder if like for you going into it with like that 3 months of almost kind of just like a trial run, right? Kind of seeing, all right, this isn't necessarily a full 8, 9, 10-month season, but did that make it seem a little bit more palatable kind of going over and still having the excitement, but knowing if it doesn't pan out, all right, I can transition a little easier.
Absolutely. I felt like 3 months was the perfect amount of time that I wouldn't feel like I was too far away from home for too long.
Yes.
And at the time, I think we were focused on not getting relegated. So like every game was pretty important. So I felt like I didn't even really necessarily have as much time to think about the fact that I'm so far from home, this, that. I was just like, you need to win games.
Yeah.
You need to help them.
Yeah.
I thought I encourage a lot of players who are in this similar NWSL situation that you're not playing much, like go abroad to Sweden for the second half of the season for 3 months, go get some playing time, see if you like it. Because I mean, I left and I haven't come back to the NWSL because I am enjoying playing abroad so much. So I think it's just such a good option to gain your confidence, put you in a new environment, learn something new. You might love it. Great, stay. You might hate it. Fine, go back. But you gain something from it.
Yeah, and it's why I'm so happy that you share the stories that you do kind of with the Players Network and also like platforms like this where we kind of just talk about what these experiences are like, because I think it's something kind of interesting that is, I know I have this conversation sometimes with players. I'm wondering if you have a similar one where a lot of players will say to me like, yeah, I want to play football and I want to travel, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
I think that the core of that's an awesome idea and you will get to do that. But also I feel like some players have this image of like, I'm training in the morning and then like in the afternoon I'm at a like coffee shop and it's in Paris, you know what I mean? And it's like the reality may be that you're still doing that training in the morning, but then you're in the Swedish village where there's 1,000 total people that live there, right? Like, and so, and it's as long as you're still okay with that possibility as well, then this is perfect for you. But if you're imagining you're going to be in Barcelona every day and just
Yeah.
walking the streets and eating paella, like it may be a little bit different. Um, I guess I'll leave it to you in that sense of like, was that ever a little bit of expectations versus reality with like going to Europe and playing soccer?
Yeah, 100%. I didn't realize like I knew so little of the world in Europe before I left, because I was like, oh, okay, Sweden, Stockholm. I'll be in Stockholm. I'll play soccer and I'll spend my weekends in Stockholm. The town that I was in was 2.5 hours by train outside of Stockholm. And there was like, you had to take 3 connecting trains. Like it wasn't easy. So what I try to do for players now, because I wish I knew, is most of these teams that you go to play in abroad are never in like the main cities. Even if it's like Paris FC or something, you're still like in a suburb outside of Paris. You're not playing on a field next to the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
So I try to just like let people know that the realities of playing abroad, like you do have those options. Like weekends, I was able to go to Stockholm, but it's not every day that I'm sitting in the cobblestone streets of the city. Like that's just not how it was.
Yeah, 100%. I'm happy that you got, but I was very similar to you as well. Like just when I first went to Europe, I didn't know what to expect, and there was probably part of me that
Mhm.
thought that as well. But clearly, even in that 3 months, you kind of did enjoy definitely something about Sweden and coming back for another year. What were the circumstances that led to signing with your next club in Sweden?
So the club that I was at, KIK, the coach was making a move to another club in Sweden, and I didn't feel like I was ready to go back to the NWSL yet. I was like, you know what? Let me get another year, another full year in this league, and see if that helps. So he made this move to this other club, and I said to him, I was like, if you're looking for a center back, I'm looking for a team. Let's make this happen. And he took me along with him. So I played for Eskilstuna my second year, but I ended up with a back injury that kept me out for the first 5 months of the season.
Wow.
And then by the time I came back, that coach got fired and a new coach came in. So the new coach didn't know me. And he was like, we probably need to bring in another player just in case your back's not okay. Turned out that player was my friend. We still have a great relationship, but she warned me. She was like, just so you know, I think I'm coming to your club. And I was like, okay, we can deal with this.
Yeah.
I ended up going on loan to another club in a town not too far away. And it was probably the worst team I've ever played for. We lost every game. But on the flip side of that, I had 2 Americans and a Canadian on that team who just made my social experience so much more fun. So even though we were losing games, that was the time that I actually ended up traveling. We had a free weekend. We went to Copenhagen. We had a free weekend. We went to London. I was like, well, if soccer is not going to be what I want right now, I'm at least going to enjoy being in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. There's so much to unpack there. I guess like speaking about the injury, was that like what was that process like going through that? Being away from 5 months. I know for me, like I found being away from the game, especially when you're overseas and you kind of feel like this is what I'm here to do, and then you can't do it. Like there's a really hard grappling with that, so to speak, and being out for that kind of time. And then too, like you said, in football, things just change left and
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden now you're back, but the coach is different. You're like, okay, not only do I have to
Yeah.
prove myself that I'm healthy, but I also have to prove my ability to this new coach. Like
Exactly.
that process of those 5 months, what was that like, going through rehab?
It was difficult because I've been a very healthy player. I haven't had injuries. So that was my first big injury. And for it to happen in a country where I also don't know the language was difficult. Like I had teammates who spoke good English, and our physio was also on our team and she helped me. But trying to go to the doctor and not being able to fully, I was able to explain myself, but I don't know that they fully understood. And when they would explain themselves, I don't know that I fully understood. So it just felt like there was this miscommunication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, they were also a bit more conservative with medicine. And I was like, I'm willing to get a cortisone shot. But Sweden didn't want to do that, or my club didn't want to do that. So I ended up coming home to have it treated.
Okay.
So there's just players who go through injuries abroad, like, and the ones who decide to do their rehab abroad and all those things, like, more power to them, because it is so difficult. Even just the language barrier, being far from home. I remember having issues because technically my papers hadn't gone through yet. So I didn't have my personal identification number. So I couldn't make an appointment at the hospital. And it was just, all of these things pile up when all you want to do is just be healthy. It's difficult.
Yeah.
But anytime I've been in those situations, there's always at least one teammate who is there, who speaks English, who's willing to be my translator, and who's willing to kind of help me get through the situation, because it's really hard to do alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point that you bring up, and it's something that maybe is overlooked by players about going abroad. It's like, what does happen when you get injured? And it's it is a difficult process, especially with the language barrier, and something as specific as like your injuries or your it's one thing to go to a restaurant and be able to order your food, right? Or something like that. But it's a whole nother thing when you're talking about like the intricacies of, this is where the pain is and this is what it feels like, and these things are occurring, and so I can completely understand how difficult it is, and not to mention now you're working with different health insurances and just different ways in which it works compared to the US system. I certainly resonate with that. The other part that you brought up about when your friend came into the team, I wanted to ask you about this because it made me think of a couple weeks ago. I had a friend of mine who I played in Australia with on the show, and he grew up in the Bilbao Academy in Spain, and he talked about just how cutthroat it was and how competitive, and he made a comment of like, I don't really know how many true friends in football I have. And I kind of was like, that seems a bit like harsh. Like, I understand what he's saying, right? Like, it's so competitive, but I don't know if I would go as far as to say that. So I'm wondering like your take on kind of friendship in this game of where it is competitive, and sometimes you're kind of taking somebody else's money away from them, right? And that's the reality of it. But also, like, you do want to create these friendships with these people that you're playing with.
It is tough waters to tread, especially because I have a history of becoming friends with the other center backs who are my competitors. I get what your friend is saying, but I don't think it has to be that way. And I think there's people within teams who agree that it doesn't have to be that way. And those are the people that I end up being friends with. Obviously, we're there every day to train and make each other better and get better. But especially when you're abroad, you need friends. Like, that is your lifeline when things aren't going well.
Yeah.
So I felt like I kind of put that aside when I went abroad. And I was like, okay, if we get to a situation where we're competing for playing time, we'll deal with that. But I wasn't looking at them as my competitor every training, because then I do think it would have affected my friendships off the field and made it more difficult. When I was in Denmark, I had a friend who messaged me. She's like, hey, do you guys need a center back? I was like, not really, but here's a guy's information if you want. They ended up bringing her in. I didn't know that I wanted more friends in my life at this point. I was like, I'm good on friends. And then she came in, and she's one of my closest friends now. But my last year, we were the two that the coach was constantly like, all right, you're going to play. Each week, we didn't know which one of us was going to play, who was going to be the happy one, who was going to be the sad one. And it was weird to navigate. But I think we had a good enough friendship prior to this happening that truly the games that she got to play, I was happy for her. Was I happy for my situation and the fact that I wasn't in the team? No. But I was happy that she got her chance and that at least one of us was playing, because there were situations where neither of us are playing. So it's so hard to navigate, but I do put heavy emphasis on the friendship just because of what it does for the times that you're not on the field.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, and I definitely think I'm in more of your camp as well, because I also look at it from the sense of like, the individual games and the moments, like I'm not necessarily going to remember all of those, but these people that I did this with day in and day out that I still have these relationships with, like, I mean, I'm sure you're the same way. Like I still talk to people that I played club soccer with, like back when I was in high school. Like
Yeah.
that stuff lasts much longer than whoever was picked to play that individual week in and week out. And I know that it is competitive. I know that there's a bit of a cutthroat nature to this business. So I understand why people look at it that way, but I'm definitely in your camp as well.
Yeah.
That transition to Denmark, how did that come about? Because I was a bit curious in the sense of, I know like the last team you played for was the best, like you said, kind of off the field socially, but
Yeah.
with not winning a game necessarily, kind of going into like market yourself, like, and I'm saying
Yeah.
it from a perspective of like I was just in a team that we were almost relegated, so I know like right now I'm not really the shiniest object when I'm going talking to coaches, but
Right.
when you're kind of making that move to go to Denmark, like how does that come about?
So the same friend who sent me to Sweden, she's like my unofficial agent. She's just got my
Yeah.
back, and I appreciate her so much. She said, my old coach is at this club, FCN in Denmark. They're looking to get promoted to the top league. If you don't have a team yet, you should join me. And at first I was like second division, like, I don't know. Do I really want to go there? But like you said, I didn't feel like I had much to market after coming off an injury and a relegation.
Yeah.
Um, so I said yes to it, and it was the best decision that I made, because this is something I also encourage other players to do, is don't poo-poo on that team that's in the division below that might win, because that could be your ticket into the top league.
Yeah.
And then from there you get exposure to play these teams, and then maybe you can switch teams to a better team. But playing in the division below the top division is not as, like, it's not bad. It's not a bad option. And it worked for me. And I want other players to know too, that sometimes it's just a stepping stone. Like, it's where you got to start to be able to make the connections to get to the
Yeah.
next place. That's how it worked for me.
Yeah. So was your time with Nordsjaelland, to have a promotion in those 4 years you were there?
Yeah. So they brought me in for the second half of the season for the promotion. We got promoted. We had our first year in the Danish top league, and we kind of shocked everybody because nobody knew what to expect from us. So we ended up finishing third. And that was the year that we also won the cup. So
Oh, okay.
right off the bat, that first year in the league was like a great year. And I was like, this is great. And then from there, teams started to figure out who we were, and we would end up coming like middle of the table. But yeah, my time in Denmark, I love it. I have nothing but good things to say about FCN.
Yeah. And I think you have a kind of unique experience than maybe some other players in the sense that, and you kind of had both of these, it seems like, and looking at your career. And in the first couple of years, it was kind of like bounce from team to team, right? And I think that's what a lot of us, when we go overseas, experience is each year is like finding a new opportunity. And that's for a variety of different reasons, right? I mean, we could make a whole list of why you need to go and find a new club sometimes. But being able to stay in one place for that amount of time and really build kind of a sense of community and roots to a certain extent, like, what was that like spending that amount of time in Denmark with one club?
I was talking to a friend about this recently, and she was just saying how it is so uncommon for players to spend that much time in one place. And I didn't realize when I was in it, but yeah, I was there for 4 years, and I was able to get so deeply rooted into the club and the people of the club. And that is what I love the most. Like, I've played for a bunch of different clubs where I don't get to know the front office. I don't get to understand the history of the club and things like that. But when I was in Denmark, it was also a smaller club.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew everybody when I was walking around the facility. I knew the academy girls team. I coached them. I trained them. And it just felt like such a comforting place. But that's because I eventually took the time to let myself be rooted there. And it took a while because I'm so used to, okay, 6 months, I need a new contract. 6 months, need a new contract.
Yeah.
And that's how it felt for the first year. I was like, am I going to come back? Are they going to renew? And then I realized, I was like, okay, you're going to be here for a bit. And at that point, then I was like, okay, I'm willing to invest in some of the relationships here and actually make friends that aren't just teammate friends.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I'm so curious about it, because I don't know if you feel the same way, but there's been certain times where I've almost felt like when I go somewhere new, that's like a bit of like a business trip type mentality. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here, this is my contract, this is the time I'm going to be here. And yes, I do want to make friends with these people and make connections, but there's also like a little bit of you that feels like maybe you don't already have one foot out the door, but you've at least got like a toe or two out the door, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's why I'm just so curious. That must have like a special meaning to be able to be like, no, this is really like a second home to me rather than just like the hotel I'm staying at on my business trip.
right, exactly. And I think it also just helped with my performance too, because I was able to not worry about being traded or anything like that. I was like, my contract is for a year and a half. I know I'm going to be here. I know my coach wants me here. And I
Yeah.
just felt like I was able to like settle in and be a more confident player because of that.
Yeah.
Instead of constantly worrying about like, all right, we got a new person. Like, I got to prove myself again. Even though we did have like a string of different coaches throughout my years, I still felt like the club knew me, they saw my value, and that was enough for the coach to eventually see that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so then if I may ask then, how did it kind of, was it just time for something new kind of at the end of your time there, or what was the end to that, that really special kind of period of your career?
It was a mix of ready for something new, and I was just a little bit tired. I We trained at 6 in the morning. I picked up a second job as the fan shop manager.
Okay.
So after training, I would be around the facilities in the fan shop doing whatever my daily tasks were. And then I was also a character coach for our youth academy girls. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my days were like from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it was just so much, but I had to do it financially in order
Yeah.
to be able to afford the apartment that I was living in Copenhagen. Um, so I needed to take a break from that because it was becoming too much. But yeah, and I'd done 3 years there. I felt like I had given what I could to the club. I could see younger players coming up that I know that they're going to want to groom to the system. And I was like, I don't want to be kicked out. Like, when
Yeah.
the younger ones
Yeah.
start to come up, and they're like, oh, thank you. I was like, I'm reading the signs. I see that the young ones are starting to be ready to take their place. And I feel like I've had my time and contributed, that I feel okay leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. It's like kind of leaving on your own terms versus like being asked to asked to kind of go, asked to pack your things and go. It's a really it's and sometimes the crazy thing is like that can happen, that transition can happen in a snap, and it's the tough thing about this sport. In speaking to your transition to Australia, which I definitely want to ask you about, just hearing you speak there, it made me think of, I was kind of just checking over like your Instagram, and when you first went to Australia, you had like a bunch of pictures of kind of doing things off the pitch, like unrelated to soccer, and just saying like
Yeah.
the caption being me doing things in Australia. I swear I'm still playing a soccer. I just have a normal life, which is weird and fun.
Yeah.
Like I think it's just a little sentence, right? But I remember reading that and like feeling that so deeply. Like, yeah, I'm doing other things that are not soccer, and
Yeah.
it feels a little weird. I'm not quite sure what to do, but it's also kind of nice. Like, how
Yes.
refreshing was that? Really getting to experience that in Australia.
It was what I needed. I don't think I had a full grasp of like what the level was going to be like. The NPL, I'm pretty sure, is semi-professional. Um, but I knew that I needed just a slight step back. And we trained 3 times a week with a game on the weekend, and I had so much free time. And after having barely any free time, like I said, I was like, this is different. What do I do with this?
Yeah.
So I ended up working so many random jobs. The Formula One Grand Prix is held in Melbourne. I worked as like a corporate host suite. And like I just did a whole bunch of random jobs. I worked for the Rotary Club convention as a bus loader just because I had free time to do random things. But it was such a switch from what I was doing. And it was nice to be able to feel like I could enjoy, like when my teammates were like, hey, we're going out for a dinner on Friday night, but we're playing on Saturday. Like I didn't feel guilty doing that. Whereas like when I was at Denmark, I was like, nope, got to be in bed at 8:00. That's it. No more. Like,
Yeah.
I felt it was a bit more freedom for me. And I know it's not for everybody. But in that time, it's what I needed. And it was a good balance for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of Australia. It's just the last episode that's gonna come out when this one will follow it, is talking about kind of what I think are some of the pros of Australia, and that is probably a huge one. Is that like maybe if you're like football crazy and you want it day in and day out, maybe Australia isn't the perfect place for you. But to have it have a little bit better balance of in your life is, I think it's a fantastic place to go and play. And obviously for you, like it sounds like it had a little bit of everything for you in the sense that you were able to enjoy time off the field, but also, still have a lot of success on the field and play at a pretty good level.
Mm-hmm. It was, like I said, it was such a good balance. And I was actually talking to another girl who's considering going to Australia, and she was playing in a top division in another country, and she was asking me about the club, and the club said the same thing to me. They're like, why do you want to come here? They're like, you were playing at like a top division in Europe. Why are you coming here? And she said the same thing. She's like, I just got off an injury. I'm not ready to go into the full professional environment yet. And like, I just think Australia is just such a good place for that. And I get so jealous of the structure that Australia has in that terms of the fact that these girls were able to work full-time jobs, come to training at the end of the day, still play a game on the weekend, make a little bit of extra money, and still have a life.
Yeah.
I crave that so much for the US to be able to like, okay, if I do want to work a 9-to-5 job, but I still want to play, we don't have that. And that makes me so sad.
I know. I know. I remember thinking the same thing, like being there. I'm like, oh, if we could, like, because I think I'm similar to you in that I like being around my family. I like being around my friends. And I'm like, why is it that I have to go 10,000 miles away just to be able to experience this? Like, I swear we could do this. Hopefully one day. I truly do hope that as well. I think in speaking to you, there's been so many times where you've spoken about kind of the network that you have of players you've played with and players you've helped and coaches and things like that. And it sounds like maybe that was a bit of the inspiration for creating actually the players network. Can you speak to a little bit about what that kind of project is and what it means to you?
So myself and 2 other players who play abroad were sitting together after a training, just talking about the woes of playing abroad and the things that we love and the things that we hate and the difficulties of, like we were saying, having to find a new contract so often. And we were just like, there's a bunch of other players out there who are doing the same thing as us, but we don't know who they are. Or like, I was in Denmark and I know that there's another American on this team and this team. And like, why aren't we all friends? Why aren't we all talking to each other? So that's kind of where the inspiration started, to just be able to let other we've branched out from only American players, but other players playing abroad to know that there are other people out there who are going through the same thing. So we have a group chat. I think it's got like 65 girls in it at the moment.
Wow.
Of people who are just playing in different places, and people will put in messages like, hey, what did you think about playing in Australia? I'm considering going to this country. What do you think? If I'm moving here, what do I need to bring? And it's just a place where you can ask those questions, because I know for myself, I don't have as many friends who play anymore. And when I want to talk about how I'm tired of waking up at 6 a.m. for training and my friend who has a baby can't relate, I can go to this group and they'll get it.
That's it really is amazing. I think that's such a cool idea, and like actually trying to foster and build like that community in a very unique way, and especially in a space like this where sometimes it can feel really difficult to have community, right? When you're going to a new country and you're just trying to figure out so many things all at once. And And speaking about that idea or of the Players Network, a lot of times, you mentioned it has to do with kind of finding your next opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, I understand also there's a level too when people ask me this, I kind of hate it. So I apologize for that if it comes across the same way to you, in the sense of like, do you kind of know where you think next is for you in terms of playing, not playing, or, new country, new club, that type of thing? Do you have that kind of on your horizons right now, or is it just sort of enjoying off-season mode?
It's that time of the year. I enjoyed probably like the first September and October, but once November hits, it's that time where like you got to start bothering your agent or start reaching out to people to see trying to get like a lay of the land. I'm open to going back to Australia. I would love to play A-League. And I know like that winter window will be opening up. I'm open to that. If that doesn't work out, I'm also open to going back to Europe. I'd love to go to a country maybe that I haven't been to yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I also really do love Scandinavia. I've had a lot of good memories there, so I'm open to that. But yeah, I'm thinking about it. It's on the forefront of my mind, and I'm excited for whatever opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, awesome. And then usually, so the last question I like to ask to kind of tie up the episode is, it's kind of in three parts, but I really love the idea of sharing player stories and just kind of story in general, but especially specifically using kind of the game as the vehicle to tell that story, right? And so if we look at your career, the first part being, if we look at your career kind of thus far, and as a story, what kind of chapter do you feel like you're in right now, of football?
I feel like I'm in like near the end chapter where you're like still trying to figure out like what the character did or what they're going to do, but it hasn't been all wrapped together yet. I don't know how many more years I'll play. My body still feels good, but I do have that like sense of I've been away from home for a while. I miss my family and my friends. The deal of missing birthdays, all of these things, like
Yeah,
it gets old.
it really does.
So in that sense, maybe abroad, I feel like I might be wrapping up soon, but maybe I'll come back and try the NWSL. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've still got some juice left in me. So I'd say at least another year or two.
Yeah.
Don't
So
hold me to it.
that may then kind of answer the second part to the question of, are there any chapters that you still feel like you want to or need to write, kind of, or are looking forward to writing, in the next phase of the book?
I go back and forth with if I want this to be a chapter, but I feel like anybody who plays abroad has the desire to play Champions League. So I still feel like that's looming in my head, that I want that experience, but I also don't want it to come at the hands of the experience where it's like you're the number one team in the league, but you're beating everybody else 12-0. So your league experience isn't as great just to get that Champions League experience. I don't know that I want that, but I don't know where the balance is. So if I can find that perfect balance of a good league with a good team that's also playing Champions League, then that I want that.
Yeah, because I'm sure you've talked to a bunch as well. I've even had some on the show that it's like they go to Kazakhstan, right? And they're in Champions League, but then they win their league games like 15-1, and you're like, all right, well, I don't know if I want that. And so then the last part of the question is, so let's say we're in one of those European cities, right, that we spoke about with the cobblestone streets and the little coffee shop, and somebody comes and they pick up the book and they kind of dust it off and read it. What do you want that person to kind of say about the story or the book?
One thing that I've always tried to keep throughout my entire soccer career is just how much I enjoy the game. And I hope that if someone picks up that book and they're reading it, they can see the lines of how much I love the game, but also the opportunities that it gave me. Because like I said, I just didn't know that this was where it was going to go. Like it's so surprising. that I hope the person picks up the book and is like, whoa, I didn't see that. I didn't like almost that it was like, oh, this is where she ended up going. Oh, she ended up doing this. Like, because that's how I, when I look at it, I'm like, oh, you did that? Like when I get to wrap this all up at the end and like my parents, of course, they save like every little like player pass that I get and all these things. And I get to like look back and hopefully someday show my children that like, I was cool. I played professional soccer. Even if you don't believe me, like I have the, but yeah, it's been surprising, but so enjoyable. And I've loved every moment throughout that. So I hope they'd be able to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely even tell it just from hearing the story here. It's been definitely an amazing one. Looking forward to see whatever your next step or next chapter that you write is. I appreciate, like I said at the top, I appreciate you so much taking the time to come and share your story. It's been a lot of fun for me.
Of course. Thanks for reaching out. This was really enjoyable.
Thank you so much again to Brianne for taking the time to share her story on the podcast with all of you. Thank you to those of you out there who are listening. I'm going to ask you one quick favor as we go into the end of the year here. We have a month until we hit December and then the new year. I want to see if we can try and get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube before the end of the year and as we kick off into 2024. So if you're watching right now and you're not subscribed, please make sure that you do that on the bottom of this video. If you are already subscribed, thank you very much. Share this channel, share the video with someone who you think would really enjoy it and can subscribe to the show. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's see if we can make this last little push and get over the mark for the end of the year. Thank you to Brianne once again. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.